Okay, hi. So in this video, we're going to talk about active transport. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video on diffusion and osmosis, then please do look at that because I'm going to assume that you know the core stuff from that video. All right, now active transport is kind of different. It's basically the opposite of diffusion and osmosis, right? So with diffusion and osmosis, we had substances, specifically in fluids, so liquids and gases, okay, spreading out from a region of higher concentration to lower concentration, right? And that was random movement. It just happens. We used the example of spraying perfume into the air, and we obviously looked at a couple of examples with water in osmosis as well, okay? Now, active transport, the word active should tell you that there's something else going on here, right? Active transport is where we have something moving from low concentration to high concentration, right? So it's going basically against the concentration gradient, right? It's almost walking up that hill. And one good example to use is the root hair cell of plants. And so this should be something that you've seen before, right? The role of a root hair cell is primarily to uptake water from the soil, right? And it does that by simple osmosis, right? It's got a very large surface area here. Okay, let me just draw it in blue. It's got a large surface area on that root hair. Water will just move in by osmosis because almost always it's going to be a higher concentration of water in the soil than it is going to be in that root hair, and so water is just going to go in, right? However, the soil also contains other really important things called minerals, right? Those things include different ions, the most common being the nitrate ion. I say the most common, the most useful to the plant, right, being the nitrate ion, right? It really needs that ion because it goes in all of its proteins, okay? Now, a lot of the time, though, the root hair cell may have already stored some of those nitrates, and so the concentration of nitrates inside the root hair cell may be higher than it is in the soil. And that does not mean that we want those nitrates, I'm just going to draw them here in green, it does not mean that we want those nitrates to leave the root hair cell. Not at all, because they're really useful for the plant. Instead, and you see we don't have many outside, instead what we want is we want to take in even more nitrates right from the soil. The way that's done is via a process called active transport. Okay, now you don't need to know too much about it. Okay, but what's going to happen is this here, let's say this is a nitrate, this is going to be pushed against its concentration gradient into the cell, right? Same with the rest. And that is a process which goes against the natural random process of diffusion. Okay, the reason this is called active transport is because that actually requires energy, right? The cell actually needs to spend some energy in order to do that. So we don't do it for things which we don't need, okay? Instead, when there's something that you really need, you've got a lot of it at the moment and maybe you need more, then active transport is used in order to get even more of it, right? And plants' root hair cells is a great example of that, okay? If you want to know more detail about it, you won't be examined on it, then feel free to have a look up active transport and how it works. Basically what's happening is you have transporter proteins embedded in the membrane, right? They're basically like machines which will grab some of that nitrate and move it back into the cell. But for those machines to work, you have to supply them with energy, and that's basically the process. So that's a good example. There's one more example which I want to share, and that is in humans, okay? Or in lots of animals, really, in mammals, etc. In our digestive system, right? Our digestive system is obviously designed for us to get all the nutrients that we need from our food, okay? Let's say in our gut we have a high concentration of things we need, like glucose, for example. That's a really simple one. Now, glucose, if we have a high concentration in our gut, where we want the glucose is in our blood, right? Let's just actually draw a very, very simplistic diagram of this. All right, so let's say this tube on the left-hand side is our gut, right? Completely not to scale and not the right shape. And on the right-hand side, this is our blood. This is a blood vessel, right? This is a capillary, okay? And these green things are glucose. And so we want the glucose in the blood, right? Because that's how it gets transported to the rest of our body, and all of our cells need glucose to carry out respiration. On the left-hand side, we have a higher concentration of glucose, and so they are literally going to move by diffusion like that. Okay, that happens, does not require energy at all, right? But let's say, completely separate scenario, right? So if you wipe the slate clean, come back, and we say that we have a load of glucose in the blood, right? And we barely have any in the gut. Now, diffusion would dictate that the glucose move backwards this way, right? Back into the gut. That does not serve purpose at all. We want as much glucose as we can get. Instead, what we do is actively transport, this does require energy, even more glucose, right? Even more glucose into the blood, like that, okay? And that does require energy, okay? So sometimes when we've just eaten a meal, for example, diffusion is going to be enough. Other times, either a long time after we've eaten a meal, or during intense exercise or something like that, there's not going to be enough glucose in our guts, right? But in our blood, we have a load of glucose, but we want even more. And so we're going to actively transport glucose from the gut into the blood. And that is the difference between the two. Okay. All right. Now that's all I'm going to say on active transport. That's all you need to know. So I hope that did make sense. It was obviously a shorter video than the last one. But if it didn't, then please feel free to post a comment in the box below or send me a direct email. But as usual, please like and subscribe because it really helps me out. And also, obviously, you'll be updated on when new videos are released. But I hope you enjoyed and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.